The knock at the door wasn't friendly. It wasn't a polite, "Can I borrow some sugar?" kind of knock. No, it was sharp, deliberate, and entitled. The kind of knock you'd expect from someone who thought they owned the place, or at least thought they should. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door like it might bite me if I got too close. Something about that knock felt like a warning. But then again, when had my ex-wife Grace ever been subtle? I pulled the door open, and there she was. Grace. My ex dressed in designer clothes she likely couldn't afford, with sunglasses perched on her head like she was auditioning for a reality show no one wanted to watch. And beside her stood Daniel, the man she'd married after me, the man she'd left me for. His smirk was the kind that made you want to punch first and ask questions later. He didn't say a word at first, just looked me up and down like I was something he'd scrape off his shoe. Grace wasted no time. "Well, Thomas, aren't you going to invite us in?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Depends. Did you bring a gift?" "That's usually what guests do." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly, turning her charm dial up to 11. "We're not here for pleasantries. We're here to discuss business." Daniel finally spoke, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Your father's estate. We have some rightful claims, and it's only fair we settle this like adults." "Rightful claims?" I couldn't help but laugh. "You're joking, right? Grace, you left me. You signed the divorce papers. And now you think you're entitled to my father's estate?" Grace stepped forward, her perfume overpowering as she crossed into my space. "Thomas, don't be unreasonable. You know how close I was to your father. He adored me." "Yeah, until he didn't," I interrupted. "Don't rewrite history just because you want a payday." Daniel's smirk grew wider, if that was even possible. "Listen, Tom." "It's Thomas," I corrected. "Only my friends call me Tom, and last I checked, you're not one of them." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he pushed on. "Look, this house is worth millions. Grace was part of this family for years, and as her husband, I think it's only right we discuss what portion of the estate belongs to her, and by extension, to us." The sheer audacity of the man was almost impressive. Almost. "You're not getting a penny," I said flatly, but before I could follow up with something less polite, another voice chimed in from behind me. "Well, this is a fascinating conversation," said Eleanor, my lawyer, stepping into view. She was holding her leather briefcase in one hand, her tablet in the other, and wearing the kind of calm, confident smile that made you believe she could take down an army with just her pen. "Thomas, aren't you going to introduce me?" Grace's face fell, but Daniel was still smirking, though it had morphed into something more uncertain. "And you are?" he asked, his tone teetering between curiosity and annoyance. "Eleanor Price," she said smoothly, "Thomas's attorney. And you must be Daniel, the man who thinks he can waltz in here and lay claim to something that doesn't belong to him. You're even bolder than I imagined." "Attorney?" Grace repeated, her confidence cracking. "Why would Thomas need an attorney?" "Because unlike some people, I like to be prepared," I said, stepping aside to let Eleanor fully into the doorway. "And I had a feeling you'd pull something like this." Eleanor opened her briefcase, pulling out a folder thicker than a dictionary. "Your timing is impeccable," she said to Grace and Daniel. "Thomas and I were just going over the details of Mr. Harrison's will. You know, the one that explicitly outlines who does and doesn't have any legal claim to the estate." The color drained from Grace's face, but Daniel stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a rooster in a barnyard. "This isn't over," he said. "You can play the legal game all you want, but we have rights. We'll see you in court if we have to." Eleanor smiled sweetly, tucking the folder back into her briefcase. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Grace pulled Daniel back, her composure barely holding. "Come on, Daniel," she hissed. "Let's go." As they retreated down the driveway, Daniel threw one last glare over his shoulder. "This isn't the end, Thomas. We'll be back." Looking forward to it, I called after them. I closed the door and turned to Eleanor, who was already flipping through her notes. "Well, that was entertaining," she said. "But you'd better buckle up, Thomas. This is just the beginning." I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. My father's legacy meant everything to me, and if Grace and Daniel thought they could take it from me, They were about to learn how wrong they were. After Grace and Daniel's dramatic departure, I sat down in the living room with Eleanor. She was already pulling out more papers from her briefcase, her expression sharper than ever. "You were right," she said, sliding a thick file across the coffee table toward me. "Your father anticipated this. He was meticulous in preparing for exactly this kind of stunt." I opened the file, finding page after page of legal documents, financial records, and correspondence that my father had quietly compiled over the years. It was overwhelming, like seeing a map of a battle plan I didn't even know I was part of. My father had always been a step ahead, and now, even after his death, he was still guiding me. "What is all this?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Evidence," Eleanor replied, sitting back and crossing her legs. "Your father didn't just write a will. He built a fortress. Every clause, every contingency, it's all designed to protect his estate from people like Grace and Daniel. He knew they'd try something like this." My stomach churned. "You're saying he saw this coming?" Eleanor nodded. "From the moment Grace walked out on you, he started putting plans in motion. He suspected she was only with you for the money, and when the divorce happened, it confirmed his fears. Then, when Daniel entered the picture, your father became even more cautious. He didn't trust either of them." I leaned back in the chair, the weight of my father's foresight settling on my shoulders. "So, what's the plan now?" Eleanor tapped her pen against her notebook. "First, we're going to make sure the will stands exactly as your father intended. Second, we're going to expose Grace and Daniel for who they really are. And finally, we're going to ensure that everything your father worked for stays in the family." Her confidence was reassuring, but it didn't make the situation any less infuriating. Grace and Daniel weren't just greedy, they were shameless. My father had barely been gone long enough for the flowers on his grave to wilt, and they were already circling like vultures. "What do we have on them?" I asked, needing to know how strong our case really was. Eleanor's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Quite a bit, actually. Your father was very thorough. He hired private investigators to look into their activities after the divorce, and the results are damning." She pulled out a smaller folder and handed it to me. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside were photos of Grace and Daniel meeting with various people, some of them lawyers, others unrecognizable. One picture showed them in a bank, holding what appeared to be documents. Another showed them in a dimly lit restaurant, speaking with someone who looked suspiciously like a private investigator of their own. "What am I looking at?" I asked, my throat dry. "Evidence of their attempts to contest the will before your father even passed," Eleanor explained. "They've been planning this for months. Daniel, in particular, has been aggressive in trying to find loopholes or weak points they could exploit." I stared at the photos, my blood boiling. Grace and I had shared years together. We weren't perfect, but I'd always believed that, at the very least, she cared about me once. Now it seemed like every moment of our marriage had been part of some larger scheme. "And the will?" I asked, trying to keep my anger in check. "How airtight is it?" "As airtight as it gets," Eleanor assured me. "Your father included a clause, what we call a no-contest clause. It essentially states that if anyone tries to challenge the will, they risk forfeiting their inheritance entirely. So if they fight this, they'll lose everything." A grim sense of satisfaction settled over me. My father hadn't just been cautious, he'd been brilliant. Grace and Daniel thought they could outsmart him, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. "What's next?" I asked, closing the folder and looking at Eleanor. "Next," she said, standing up and gathering her papers, "we prepare for the reading of the will. That's when this will all come to a head. Grace and Daniel are going to think they've won, and when they do, we'll be ready to show them just how wrong they are." I followed her to the door, my resolve hardening with every step. This wasn't just about protecting my father's legacy anymore. It was about standing up to people who thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. As Eleanor stepped outside, she turned back to me. "One more thing, Thomas. Your father left you something. It's not in the will, it's separate. I'll bring it to you tomorrow before the reading. He wanted you to have it when the time was right." "What is it?" I asked, curiosity piqued. She smiled. "You'll see." I watched her drive away, my mind racing. Whatever my father had left me, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. Grace and Daniel thought they had this in the bag, but they didn't know what they were walking into. They didn't know who they were up against. The next morning, Eleanor arrived right on time, holding a small leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope in her hands. There was a weight to her expression, one that told me whatever she had brought wasn't just another piece of legal strategy. It was personal. "This belonged to your father," she said, handing me the journal first. "He kept it during his last year, knowing things were coming to a head." I took the journal carefully, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. My father, Richard, had always been a man of quiet reflection, preferring to write down his thoughts rather than voice them aloud. This journal felt like a part of him I hadn't seen before. "What's in it?" I asked. Eleanor gestured for me to open it. His thoughts, suspicions, and plans. But more importantly, the truth about Grace. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the journal. The first few pages were filled with entries about my father's declining health, his concerns for the future, and his determination to protect the family's legacy. But as I turned the pages, the tone shifted. March 15th. Grace is not the woman Thomas thinks she is. She came into his life with ulterior motives, and while I hoped their love would be genuine, it's clear now that she was only ever after what she thought she could gain. I've been watching her closely, and the signs are all there. Secret phone calls, unexplained trips, and now, Daniel. I paused, the words cutting deeper than I expected. My father had known. He had seen what I refused to acknowledge during my marriage. Grace's betrayal wasn't just personal. It had been calculated. I turned another page. April 2nd. Daniel is dangerous. He doesn't care about Grace beyond what she can deliver. He's pushing her to secure access to the estate, to manipulate me while I'm vulnerable. I won't let them win. I've started documenting everything, leaving no room for doubt when the time comes. Thomas will see the truth, even if it's painful. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. I looked up at Eleanor, who was watching me carefully. "He knew," I said, my voice hoarse. "He knew about all of it." Eleanor nodded. "And he made sure you'd have the tools to fight back." She handed me the envelope next. I opened it to find a letter in my father's handwriting, addressed directly to me. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, it means the battle has begun. Grace and Daniel have made their move, just as I knew they would. I'm sorry you have to face this, but I want you to remember one thing. You are not alone. I've given Eleanor everything she needs to ensure the truth comes to light. Trust her, and trust yourself. You're stronger than you think. As for Grace and Daniel, they've underestimated you, and me. They think this is about money, but they're wrong. This is about integrity, about protecting what truly matters. Inside the journal, you'll find evidence of their deceit, but there's more to come. The will is only the beginning. Watch closely, Thomas. The pieces are already falling into place. With love and faith in you, Dad, asterisk. I set the letter down, my chest tight with emotion. Even from beyond the grave, my father was guiding me, standing beside me as I faced the people who had tried to tear our family apart. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, interrupting my thoughts. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "Your father hired a private investigator. This drive contains surveillance footage and audio recordings, everything he uncovered about Grace and Daniel's plans." I stared at the drive, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "What did he find?" Eleanor sighed. "Meetings with lawyers to discuss contesting the will. Bank transfers that suggest Grace was siphoning money from your joint account during your marriage. And Daniel? He's been bribing people left and right, trying to dig up dirt on you and your father." I clenched my fists, the weight of their betrayal crashing over me like a wave. They hadn't just wanted to hurt me, they wanted to destroy everything my father had built. Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thomas, this isn't just about defending the estate anymore. It's about showing them they can't get away with this." I nodded, a newfound resolve settling in my chest. "Let's make sure they don't." As Eleanor packed up her things, I picked up my father's journal again, flipping to a page I hadn't read yet. A single phrase stood out, written in bold, deliberate letters. "The truth always comes to light." I closed the journal, the words echoing in my mind. Grace and Daniel thought they could manipulate me, deceive me, and take what wasn't theirs. But they didn't realize that my father had left me more than an inheritance. He'd left me the strength to fight back. The reading of the will was tomorrow, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the will reading arrived, and the tension in the room was palpable. Grace and Daniel sat across from me at the long conference table, looking far too confident for my liking. Grace was dressed to the nines, her sharp smile a mask of smug superiority, while Daniel lounged beside her, exuding the arrogance of someone who believed he'd already won. Eleanor sat to my left, calm and composed as always, her legal briefcase perched beside her. Across the room, the executor of my father's will, Mr. Warren, adjusted his glasses and prepared to begin. As he opened the official documents, Grace leaned forward, her eyes practically sparkling with anticipation. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice dripping with fake charm. "We're all here for the same reason." I didn't respond, choosing instead to glance at Eleanor. She gave me a subtle nod, a signal that we were ready for what was about to unfold. Mr. Warren cleared his throat. This will was written and finalized 6 months before Mr. Harrison's passing. It clearly outlines the division of assets, including the estate, business holdings, and financial trusts. Grace practically purred. "Wonderful. I'm sure Richard left instructions that reflect his affection for everyone involved." "Affection?" I muttered under my breath. Eleanor hid a smirk. Mr. Warren continued. "The initial division is as follows. The Harrison estate, including this property, is to be allocated 60% to Thomas Harrison and 40% to us," Grace interrupted, sitting back in triumph. "Exactly as I expected." But Mr. Warren raised his hand, stopping her mid-gloat. "Please let me finish. The 40% allocation is contingent upon the fulfillment of specific conditions outlined in the will. These conditions are detailed in an addendum added 3 days before Mr. Harrison's death." Grace's smile faltered. "What conditions?" Mr. Warren glanced at Eleanor, who took the opportunity to speak. "The conditions involve a clause requiring a thorough investigation of any parties who attempt to claim inheritance under questionable pretenses." Daniel sat up straighter, his smirk replaced with unease. "What does that mean?" Eleanor's voice was steady, but her words hit like a hammer. "It means that any attempt to manipulate Mr. Harrison or his estate activates a no-contest clause. Essentially, if you're caught trying to deceive your way into an inheritance, you lose everything." Grace's confidence began to crack. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We've done nothing wrong." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her expression almost amused. "Really? Then perhaps you'd like to explain these." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents and photographs, sliding them across the table for everyone to see. Grace hesitated, but Daniel snatched them up, flipping through them with increasing panic. "What is this?" he demanded. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Evidence. Photos of the two of you, meeting with lawyers to discuss contesting the will before Richard even passed. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers from Grace's account during her marriage to Thomas. Emails in which you, Daniel, pressured Richard's staff for information about the estate. Shall I go on?" Grace's face turned pale, but she wasn't ready to back down. "These are lies," she said, her voice shaky. "Fabricated to make us look bad." "Lies?" Eleanor echoed, pulling out another piece of paper. "This is a signed statement from one of Richard's nurses, detailing how you, Grace, attempted to bribe her for details about his health and the will. Still think it's fabricated?" Daniel's composure completely crumbled as he threw the photos back onto the table. "This is a setup," he spat. "You're trying to trap us." "No," Eleanor said, her tone icy. "You trapped yourselves. Richard Harrison was one of the sharpest men I've ever known, and he wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of him or his family." Grace's voice rose, desperate now. "This doesn't prove anything. Richard was old, sick. He probably didn't even know what he was signing." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Grace. Claiming that Richard wasn't of sound mind is a dangerous argument when we have evidence proving your attempts to manipulate him. You'd only incriminate yourself further." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "We're leaving. This is a waste of time." But before he could storm out, Eleanor dropped her final bombshell. "Leaving won't change what happens next. This evidence is already with the authorities, and any attempt to challenge the will from here on out will result in criminal charges." The room went silent. Grace's hands were trembling now, her carefully constructed facade in shambles. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear, his earlier bravado nowhere to be found. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself a small smile. "I warned you not to come here." Grace glared at me, her voice venomous. "You think you've won, don't you? This isn't over." Eleanor stood, collecting her papers with a calm efficiency that only made Grace's fury more pathetic. "Oh, it's over," she said. "You just haven't realized it yet." As Grace and Daniel slinked out of the room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My father's plan was working perfectly. The truth was coming to light, and Grace and Daniel's greed had led them straight into the trap they deserved. I turned to Eleanor. "What's next?" She smiled, her confidence unshaken. "Next? We let them dig their hole even deeper. The courtroom is where this really gets interesting." I nodded, ready for whatever came next. My father had prepared me for this, and I wasn't about to let him down. The day of reckoning was finally here, the courtroom showdown where Grace and Daniel would meet the consequences of their greed. Eleanor and I arrived early, her briefcase practically brimming with the evidence my father had meticulously gathered. The courthouse buzzed with activity, and I could see reporters already circling outside, eager for a sensational story. Inside, the courtroom was filled with an audience of curious onlookers. Grace and Daniel sat at the defendant's table, their expressions a mix of forced calm and barely concealed panic. Grace was impeccably dressed, as usual, but the cracks in her composure were beginning to show. Daniel, on the other hand, looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. Their attorney sat between them, whispering hurried reassurances that didn't seem to help. I sat beside Eleanor, who looked as calm and collected as ever. "They're going to fight this," I whispered. "They can try," she replied with a faint smile. "But your father left no loose ends." The judge entered, and the room fell silent. After the formalities, the case began with the reading of the will. The initial terms were straightforward. 60% of the estate was allocated to me, while 40% was to go to Grace and Daniel, contingent on fulfilling specific conditions. Grace sat up straighter, her confidence briefly returning. But then Eleanor stood, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, we would like to introduce evidence related to the conditions of the will, as outlined in the addendum." Grace's attorney stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant to the initial distribution of assets." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Price." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice steady and precise. "The conditions of the will include a no-contest clause. This clause states that any party attempting to manipulate Mr. Richard Harrison or his estate forfeits their claim entirely. We have evidence that the defendants, Grace and Daniel, engaged in such manipulation." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Grace's attorney scrambled to object again, but the judge waved him off. "Let her continue." Eleanor approached the bench, handing over a stack of documents. These include bank statements, photographs, and signed affidavits detailing the defendant's actions. Notably, we have proof of bribery attempts, fraudulent financial activities, and premeditated plans to contest the will before Mr. Harrison's passing. The judge reviewed the documents, his expression darkening. Grace's attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Daniel leaned over to whisper something to him, but the attorney ignored him, clearly out of his depth. Eleanor continued, her tone sharp. "Furthermore, we have video evidence of Grace and Daniel discussing their plans. This includes a recorded attempt to bribe Mr. Harrison's nurse for information about his condition and the contents of his will." At that, Eleanor pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the court clerk. Moments later, the video played on the courtroom screens. Grace's voice filled the room, unmistakably conniving. "Once the old man's gone, we'll challenge the will. Daniel, you just have to keep pressuring him. He's sick. He'll cave eventually." Grace's face turned white, and Daniel's jaw clenched as murmurs spread through the room. The judge silenced the crowd with a sharp bang of his gavel. "Do you deny this is your voice, Mrs. Grace Mitchell?" Eleanor asked, her words cutting like a knife. Grace hesitated, then stammered, "Aye. It's taken out of context." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Would you like to hear more context? We have hours of recordings." The room erupted in whispers again, and the judge banged his gavel once more. "Order. Mrs. Mitchell, please answer the question." Grace glanced at Daniel, who offered no help, then back at her attorney. Finally, she slumped in her chair. "No," she muttered. "I don't deny it." That single admission sealed their fate. Eleanor wasn't done yet. "Your Honor, I would also like to present evidence of financial fraud committed by the defendants. These bank statements show that Mrs. Mitchell funneled money from her joint account with Mr. Harrison during their marriage, transferring funds to accounts under her maiden name. Mr. Daniel Mitchell was complicit in these actions." Daniel exploded. "That's a lie." Eleanor calmly slid another document across the table. "These records beg to differ, Mr. Mitchell. You see, Mr. Harrison was thorough. He hired private investigators who tracked every dollar and every meeting. Your lies and schemes are all laid bare." The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Do the defendants have any response to these allegations?" Grace's attorney stood shakily. "Your Honor, my clients respectfully decline to comment at this time." The judge nodded grimly. "Then we'll proceed." The courtroom was silent except for the occasional scribble of reporters' pens and the judge's deliberate flipping of documents. Grace and Daniel sat rigidly, their earlier bravado long gone. The walls were closing in on them, and they knew it. The prosecution called me to the stand. As I walked past Grace and Daniel, I caught the faint hint of desperation in Grace's eyes, a glimmer of the control she was rapidly losing. Daniel, however, wouldn't even look at me. "Please state your name for the court," the prosecutor began. "Thomas Harrison," I said, my voice steady. "Mr. Harrison, can you describe your relationship to the defendants?" I glanced briefly at Grace and Daniel before answering. "Grace Mitchell is my ex-wife, and Daniel Mitchell is her current husband." The prosecutor nodded. "And during your marriage, did you observe any behavior from Mrs. Mitchell that might indicate financial misconduct or manipulation?" I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to steady myself. "Yes," I said finally. "Grace often withdrew large sums of money without explanation. When I questioned her about it, she would dismiss my concerns or claim it was for household expenses." "Did these withdrawals continue after your divorce?" "They did," I confirmed. I later learned she had accessed our joint accounts during the divorce proceedings, transferring money into private accounts under her maiden name. Grace's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection. This is speculative and irrelevant." The judge waved him off. "Overruled. The witness may continue." The prosecutor leaned in. "Mr. Harrison, are you aware of any actions taken by the defendants regarding your late father, Mr. Richard Harrison?" I nodded. "Yes. Grace and Daniel both attempted to manipulate my father in his final months. They visited him frequently, claiming to care about his well-being, but in reality, they were pressuring him for details about his will and estate." Gasps rippled through the audience, and I caught Grace shooting daggers at me with her eyes. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale. "Did your father ever share his suspicions about their intentions?" the prosecutor asked. I nodded again. "He did. My father was a cautious man, and he saw through their act. He even documented their attempts to manipulate him." "Can you elaborate on that documentation?" "My father hired private investigators to gather evidence. He collected photos, financial records, and even video recordings of their actions. He wanted to ensure his legacy was protected." The prosecutor approached the judge. "Your Honor, we would like to submit into evidence the surveillance footage provided by Mr. Richard Harrison." The court clerk loaded the footage onto the screens. The first clip showed Grace and Daniel in a hospital hallway, whispering conspiratorially. Grace's voice echoed through the room. "Once the will is read, we'll contest it. Daniel, you need to keep pushing him. Remind him how much I've sacrificed for this family." The second clip showed Daniel meeting with an unknown man in a parking lot. exchanging a thick envelope. The prosecutor explained, "This is footage of Mr. Mitchell bribing a nurse for confidential information about Mr. Harrison's health." Grace covered her face with her hands, while Daniel sat frozen, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. The courtroom murmured, the air thick with tension. The prosecutor turned back to me. "Mr. Harrison, what impact has this situation had on you?" I took a deep breath. Losing my father was devastating enough, but to watch Grace and Daniel try to exploit his death for their own gain, it's been infuriating and heartbreaking. My father built his legacy with hard work and integrity, and I refuse to let them tarnish it. The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. No further questions." As I returned to my seat, Grace's attorney rose to cross-examine me, but before he could begin, Grace stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is a sham," she shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. Richard was a stubborn old man who didn't know what he was doing in the end. This so-called evidence doesn't prove anything. The judge banged his gavel. "Mrs. Mitchell, sit down, or I will hold you in contempt." But Grace wasn't done. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think you've won, don't you, Thomas? You think you're better than me because you're sitting there with that smug look on your face. Well, let me tell you something. You're nothing. Without your father's money, you'd have nothing." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously, and the judge's gavel thundered repeatedly. "Order. Mrs. Mitchell, that's enough." Daniel slouched in his chair, his head in his hands, clearly wishing he could disappear. Grace's attorney tried to calm her, but she shoved him away, continuing her tirade. "You'll regret this, Thomas. Mark my words." Two bailiffs approached and began escorting her out of the courtroom. She fought against them, yelling over her shoulder, "This isn't over." The judge ordered a recess, and Eleanor turned to me, her expression satisfied. "Well, that was better than I could have hoped for." Her outburst just sealed their fate. "She completely lost it," I said, still processing what had just happened. Eleanor nodded. The jury saw everything they needed to see. Grace and Daniel's schemes, their entitlement, and now their true colors. As we left the courtroom for a short break, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The evidence was airtight, and Grace's meltdown had only solidified our case. My father's careful planning was paying off, and soon, justice would be served. After the courtroom recess, I returned to my seat, my mind swirling with thoughts of everything that had unfolded. Grace's meltdown was still fresh in everyone's mind, her outburst having left the jury with no doubt about her true nature. Daniel's silence, his unwillingness to defend her or even himself, only further cemented their guilt. Eleanor sat beside me, calm and focused as ever. But before the judge resumed proceedings, she leaned over and whispered, "There's one more thing your father planned that I haven't shared yet. It's time to play the final card." "What is it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. She gave me a small, conspiratorial smile. "You'll see soon enough." The judge returned, and the proceedings resumed. The prosecutor stood and announced, "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to submit, a statement recorded by Mr. Richard Harrison shortly before his passing." The room fell silent. Grace, now visibly shaken and pale, exchanged a nervous glance with Daniel. The judge nodded, granting the request, and the court clerk prepared the video. The screen came to life, and there he was, my father. Richard Harrison appeared thinner and frilier than I remembered, but his voice was as firm and commanding as ever. He sat in his favorite leather chair, the bookshelves of his study framing him in the background. "If you're watching this," he began, "then my suspicions have been confirmed. Grace and Daniel have attempted to claim a part of my estate through manipulation and deceit. To them, I say this: your greed has blinded you to the fact that this was never about money. It was about integrity, about the values this family was built upon." He leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Grace, you entered my son's life under false pretenses, pretending to care for him while secretly plotting your own gain. And Daniel, you saw an opportunity to exploit that and took it without a second thought. But you underestimated me. You underestimated my son. And now, The consequences of your actions are unavoidable. The courtroom was completely still as my father continued. To my son, Thomas, I leave not just my estate but the responsibility to uphold our family's legacy. Thomas, I know this has been difficult, but you've handled it with strength and dignity. I'm proud of you. He paused, his expression softening briefly before hardening again. To those who think they can take what doesn't belong to them, remember this: the truth always finds its way to the light. And when it does, you will have no one to blame but yourselves. The video ended, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. Grace looked as if she'd been physically struck, while Daniel's head hung low, his defeat written all over him. The prosecutor stood again, his voice calm and resolute. Your Honor, this video, along with the overwhelming evidence presented, demonstrates the defendant's intent to manipulate Mr. Harrison and his estate. We request that the court enforce the no contest clause in Mr. Harrison's will, barring Grace and Daniel Mitchell from receiving any inheritance. Grace's attorney feebly attempted to object, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand. Enough. The evidence speaks for itself. The judge turned his attention to Grace and Daniel. Your actions have been nothing short of reprehensible. You betrayed a man's trust, manipulated his family, and tried to profit from his passing. The court hereby enforces the no contest clause. Grace and Daniel Mitchell are disqualified from any claim to the Harrison estate. The gavel struck, and it was over. Grace let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as if to stifle a scream. Daniel simply slumped in his seat, looking like a man who had lost everything, because he had. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor and I stayed behind for a moment. She pulled out a sealed envelope from her bag and handed it to me. Your father asked me to give this to you once the case was resolved. I opened it carefully, revealing another handwritten letter. Thomas, if you're reading this, it means justice has been served. But this letter isn't about them. It's about you. I wanted you to know how much I believed in you, how proud I am of the man you've become. This fight wasn't just about protecting the estate. It was about ensuring you understood your worth and strength. In the desk drawer of my study, you'll find one last surprise. It's something I hope will help you move forward and continue building the legacy we started together. With love, Dad. My hands trembled as I read the letter. Eleanor smiled softly. He thought of everything, didn't he? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Let's go, I finally said. I want to see what he left. Back at the house, I opened the drawer my father had mentioned. Inside, I found another envelope, this one containing a deed. It was for a piece of land adjacent to my father's estate, with a note attached. This is for you, Thomas. I bought it because I knew you'd make something beautiful out of it. Whatever you choose to do, know that I'll always be with you. I sat back, overwhelmed by the depth of my father's foresight and love. He hadn't just left me his estate. He'd left me a future, one filled with possibilities and the strength to move forward. That evening, as I stood in my father's garden, the weight of the past weeks finally began to lift. The roses he had planted swayed gently in the breeze, a reminder of his enduring presence. I thought of his words, the truth always finds its way to the light. It had, and now, it was time to rebuild. Not just for myself, but for the legacy my father had entrusted to me. The courtroom may have ruled in my favor, but the fallout from Grace and Daniel's actions was far from over. The media frenzy that followed was relentless, plastering their schemes and eventual downfall across every major news outlet. Reporters camped outside my father's estate, eager for quotes or sound bites, but Eleanor expertly shielded me from the chaos. Keep a low profile for now, she advised. Let the storm pass. You don't owe anyone your story. She was right. I had nothing to prove, but watching Grace and Daniel's public humiliation unfold brought a sense of closure I hadn't expected. A few days after the trial, I received a call from Eleanor. The DA's office has finalized the charges, she said. Grace and Daniel are facing multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted bribery. Daniel's cooperation during the investigation might reduce his sentence, but Grace. She paused, her tone heavy. Grace could be looking at 10 to 15 years. I exhaled slowly, processing the weight of it all. Grace had always been manipulative, but I never thought she'd fall this far. Her desperation had blinded her to the reality of her actions, and now, she was paying the price. "What about Daniel?" I asked. "He's agreed to testify against her," Eleanor replied. "It's his best chance at a lighter sentence. Not exactly the loyal husband she thought he was." I almost laughed at the irony. Daniel, who had schemed and plotted alongside Grace, was now throwing her under the bus to save himself. It was poetic justice in a way. The more the police and DA dug into their actions, the more incriminating evidence surfaced. Grace's attempts to manipulate my father weren't her first offense. She had a long history of targeting wealthy individuals, dating back years. Offshore accounts, fake business ventures, and fraudulent documents all pointed to a well-practiced con artist. But this time, she'd made a fatal error, underestimating my father. His meticulous planning and foresight had caught her in a web of her own making. I thought about the private investigators my father had hired, the surveillance footage, the recordings, every piece of evidence he had so carefully gathered. He had known exactly how this would play out, and he had ensured she wouldn't escape accountability. A week after the trial, Eleanor convinced me to hold a brief press conference. "Control the narrative," she said. "Show them you're moving forward." Standing in front of a crowd of reporters, I took a deep breath and began. My father was a man of integrity, a man who believed in justice and hard work. His legacy was never about wealth. It was about the values he instilled in me and everyone who knew him. While recent events have been difficult, they've reminded me of the importance of protecting what truly matters: family, honesty, and resilience. I want to thank the court for ensuring justice was served and my father's wishes were honored. As for me, I plan to honor his legacy by continuing the work he started. I didn't take questions afterward. There was nothing more to say. With the court battle behind me, I turned my attention back to the estate. Walking through the house and garden, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't just a house. It was a testament to my father's love and dedication. Every brick, every tree, every flower bed held memories of him. But it wasn't enough to simply preserve what he had built. I wanted to expand it, to create something that would honor his legacy for generations to come. Eleanor and I sat down to discuss the next steps. "The land your father bought next to the estate," she said. "What do you want to do with it?" I thought about it for a long moment before replying. "I want to create a public garden, something beautiful and open to everyone." My father believed in sharing what he had, and I think he'd love the idea. Eleanor smiled. "Harrison Gardens," she said. "It has a nice ring to it." Not long after the press conference, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Grace. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. Inside was a single page, her handwriting shaky and uneven. "Thomas, I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed to say this. I was wrong about everything. I let greed and pride destroy what we had, and I regret it more than you'll ever know. You were a good man, and your father was a great one. I failed to see that when it mattered. I don't blame you for what happened. I blame myself. I hope you find peace. Grace." I folded the letter and set it aside. It didn't change anything, but maybe, just maybe, it meant she had finally begun to understand the gravity of her actions. Months passed, and the land my father had purchased began to transform. Harrison Gardens became a reality, a sprawling, vibrant space filled with the flowers and plants my father had loved so much. Visitors from all walks of life came to enjoy its beauty, and with every bloom, I felt a deeper connection to my father's spirit. Eleanor and Isaiah, my cousin, who had stepped in to help during the chaos, stood beside me during the grand opening. "He'd be proud," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "I hope so," I replied, looking out at the crowd. This is what he wanted. Not just justice, but growth. And that's what it was. Grace and Daniel had tried to take everything from me, but they'd failed. My father's legacy remained intact, stronger than ever. And as the garden bloomed around me, I knew I'd found something even more valuable than justice. I'd found peace. The garden was flourishing. Bright, vibrant flowers swayed gently in the breeze, a living testament to my father's legacy. Harrison Gardens had become more than just a project. It was a symbol of resilience, growth, and new beginnings. Months after the courtroom battles and public fallout, life finally began to settle. The chaos that Grace and Daniel had brought into my life felt like a distant memory, their influence reduced to lessons learned and strength gained. My father's words echoed in my mind often. The truth always finds its way to the light. One morning, Isaiah, my cousin, and one of the few family members who had stood by me, visited the garden. He'd been instrumental in managing the estate while I focused on building something meaningful. "This place is incredible, Thomas," he said, his voice filled with admiration as he walked along the garden paths. "Your father would have loved this." I smiled, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. He always said beauty can grow in the hardest soil. I think this proves him right. Isaiah nodded, then hesitated. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to expand this even further. A community center, maybe? Something that could offer more than just beauty, education, resources, a place where people can connect." His suggestion caught me off guard, but also sparked something in me. My father's legacy wasn't just about the garden. It was about giving back, about building something lasting. I nodded slowly. "Let's do it. Let's make this more than just a garden." One afternoon, as I sorted through old files in my father's study, I came across Grace's letter again. I hadn't thought about it much since the day I read it, but something compelled me to pick it up. Her words still carried the weight of regret, but I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel anything, really, just a quiet sense of closure. Grace and Daniel had made their choices, and they were living with the consequences. I had no intention of responding, but I also had no desire to hold on to the bitterness they tried to leave behind. I placed the letter in a drawer, closing it both literally and figuratively. It was time to let go completely. The day of the official opening for Harrison Gardens was sunny and warm, as if the weather itself was blessing the occasion. Families, couples, and individuals from all over the community came to see what we had built. The laughter of children echoed through the garden, blending with the soft rustle of leaves and the hum of bees. Eleanor stood beside me, holding a cup of coffee. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, raising her cup in a toast. "To Richard Harrison, a man who knew how to plan for everything." "To Dad," I said, raising my own invisible toast. "And to second chances." As the months rolled on, Harrison Gardens grew into something I could never have imagined. We added a small cafe, a library corner, and even hosted workshops on gardening and sustainability. The community center Isaiah suggested became a reality, offering free classes, events, and resources to those in need. The garden had become a hub of life and activity, a place where people came to find peace, connection, and inspiration. It was everything my father would have wanted, and more. One evening, as I walked through the garden at sunset, I found myself stopping at a small plaque I had placed near the entrance. It read, "In loving memory of Richard Harrison, a man who taught us that even in the hardest soil, something beautiful can grow." I ran my fingers over the engraving, a lump forming in my throat. My father had done more than protect his legacy. He had given me the tools to build one of my own. As I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. This was my new beginning. Grace and Daniel were the past, their schemes nothing more than shadows. What mattered now was the life I was building, one bloom at a time. The truth had come to light, justice had been served, and now it was time to move forward, to grow, to bloom, to live. And with that, the journey came full circle, not just for me, but for everyone touched by my father's life and legacy. I still remember the moment my life, as I thought I knew it, crumbled. It wasn't dramatic in the way you'd imagine. No screaming, no shouting, just a few cold words delivered with surgical precision. I was standing in the middle of a bustling conference room in Berlin, halfway through presenting a groundbreaking deal that would secure my company's future. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I wasn't going to answer it, but something about the timing, or maybe it was intuition, made me step aside. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm, professional. "Michael," Mary's voice came through the line. It wasn't warm, as it usually was when I traveled. It was clipped, detached, like she was reading a prepared statement. "I'm leaving you." The words didn't register at first. I blinked, letting her continue, even as my stomach tightened. "I'm pregnant. It's Mark's child. I've sold the house and the car. Don't bother coming back." Just like that. No hesitation, no apology. My wife of 7 years, the woman I had built my life around, had casually dismantled our marriage like it was a bad contract. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. I should have been furious, or hurt, or humiliated. But in that moment, I felt nothing. My emotions didn't have time to catch up to the logic racing through my brain. "All right," I said, my voice steady. I could hear her surprise, the slight hitch in her breath. She had expected tears, anger, a fight. Instead, I gave her calm indifference. It wasn't because I didn't care. Oh, I cared. But I knew instinctively that any reaction would only feed her sense of triumph. There was a long pause. "That's it? Just all right?" she asked, almost annoyed. "That's it," I replied, then ended the call. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, walked back into the room, and finished my presentation without missing a beat. No one in that room knew my marriage had just ended, and honestly, I wasn't ready to process it either. The flight back to my hotel was a blur. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was already dissecting Mary's words. Pregnant? I hadn't even known we were trying for a child. Mark? Who the hell was Mark? And selling the house? The car? I'd have to verify everything, but it sounded like she had been planning this for months. I sat in my hotel room, staring out at the Berlin skyline. The anger was there, simmering just below the surface, but I refused to let it take over. Instead, I reached for my laptop and started making calls. If Mary thought she could blindside me, she clearly didn't know me as well as she thought. "Andrew," I said when my lawyer picked up, "I need you to freeze the sale of my house. Effective immediately." "Michael, what's going on?" he asked, his voice concerned. "My wife just informed me she's leaving me. Claims she sold the house and the car." Andrew was silent for a moment, likely processing the same implications I had. "We'll block any transactions on the house deed immediately. The car. Is it still leased in your name?" "Yes." "Good. She can't legally sell it without your consent. I'll take care of everything." I thanked him and hung up, moving to my next call. "Lisa," I said to my financial advisor, "I need you to freeze all joint accounts." She didn't ask questions, just confirmed it would be done. That's why I hired her. When the logistics were handled, I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. The shock was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but something else was building alongside it: determination. I wasn't going to let Mary destroy me. She thought she had the upper hand, that her betrayal would leave me floundering. But she underestimated me. For years, I had been a strategist in business, outmaneuvering competitors and negotiating deals that others thought impossible. Mary might have blindsided me emotionally, but strategically, she had just made her first move in a game she didn't even realize I was playing. I didn't react because I knew better. Reacting meant giving her control, and I wasn't about to do that. Instead, I would wait, plan, and strike when the time was right. She thought she had one, but this was just the beginning. The thing about betrayal is that it's never as simple as it looks on the surface. It isn't just the act itself. It's the planning, the lies, the manipulation that precedes it. Mary didn't just wake up one day and decide to leave me. She had been scheming, calculating, moving her pieces across the board while I was busy building a future for us. That was her first mistake, assuming I wasn't paying attention. Once the shock of her call wore off, I got to work. Anger would have been satisfying but pointless. Begging her to reconsider? Out of the question. Instead, I focused on what I do best: strategy. The first step was information. I didn't know who Mark was, but I knew someone who could find out. I called David, a private investigator I'd worked with in the past. "I need you to dig into someone for me," I told him. "Mark. He's involved with my wife." David didn't need a backstory. He just asked for her phone number and any recent activity I could provide. "It'll take me a couple of days," he said, and I hung up feeling the faint stirrings of control returning. Next, I turned my attention to the assets Mary claimed she'd already sold. The house was the obvious priority. If she had truly sold it, I would have seen legal paperwork cross my desk. But just to be sure, I called Andrew again. She can't sell it without my signature, right? Correct, he assured me. But she could list it. I'll check for any recent activity and flag it immediately. He called back within an hour. She listed the house last week at a price well below market value, probably to make a quick sale. But don't worry, it's blocked. The car was easier. It was leased under my name, which meant it couldn't legally change hands. Still, I contacted the dealership to confirm that no unauthorized actions had been taken. Everything was secure. The next step was financial. Lisa, my financial advisor, worked quickly to freeze our joint accounts. I made sure Mary would wake up the next day to find her access denied. No withdrawals, no transfers, no sudden shopping sprees. But here's the thing. I didn't want her to know right away. If she realized the accounts were frozen, she might suspect I was onto her. Instead, I asked Lisa to make the freeze look like a routine banking issue. A simple, technical glitch that wouldn't raise alarm bells. With my assets secured, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. Mary thought she had outmaneuvered me, but in reality, she was walking into a trap of her own making. That night, I sat in my hotel room, replaying the last few months in my mind. The missed dinners, the secretive texts, the sudden interest in expensive clothes and jewelry. I had ignored it all, chalking it up to stress or boredom. How naive. But here's the thing about betrayal. It reveals more about the betrayer than the betrayed. Mary thought she was clever, that I was too focused on my work to notice the cracks in our relationship. She didn't realize that I had spent years honing my instincts in boardrooms and negotiations. I could smell a lie a mile away. It just took me a little longer to notice when it was coming from my own wife. By the time I went to bed, I had the framework of a plan in place. The goal wasn't just to protect myself. It was to let Mary believe she had one. I wanted her to feel comfortable, confident, even triumphant. Because that's when people make mistakes. David called the next morning with his first update. "Mark's a piece of work," he said. "He's got a history of conning women out of money. A couple of them even filed police reports, but nothing stuck. He's good at disappearing when things go south." I smiled grimly. Mary had chosen poorly, but I wasn't about to warn her. "Keep digging," I said. "I want everything, addresses, accounts, relationships, the works." David promised results, and I felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. The beauty of a well-executed plan is that it doesn't rely on rash decisions. It's deliberate, methodical, and devastating. Mary didn't know it yet, but she was playing a game she couldn't win. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, staring out at the Berlin skyline. Mary thought she had stolen everything from me, but in reality, she had nothing. And when the time was right, I would show her just how wrong she was. Mary probably thought she had outsmarted me. I can imagine the smug satisfaction she must have felt, thinking she had everything wrapped up while I was thousands of miles away. She must have laughed to herself, imagining me walking into an empty house, confused and helpless. But what she didn't realize is that I had already laid the groundwork to dismantle her illusion piece by piece. While I was strategizing abroad, Mary was busy playing house with Mark, living in a fantasy world that would soon crumble beneath her. The first cracks began to show when she tried to access our joint account. I had deliberately orchestrated this moment. The accounts were frozen, but Lisa had flagged the freeze as a banking glitch. Mary likely called the bank, frustrated and impatient, only to be told that the issue was being resolved and she just needed to wait. I pictured her pacing the living room, perhaps with Mark lounging nearby, feeding her empty reassurances. Mark, of course, had no idea that his golden goose was about to run out of eggs. Meanwhile, Mary had listed the house for a quick sale. She had no idea the transaction had been blocked. Andrew informed me that she even found a buyer willing to pay cash. They'd likely agreed on a closing date, with Mary planning to pocket the money and make a fresh start. But when the paperwork stalled, she must have been confused. She probably assumed it was just a bureaucratic delay. I wondered if Mark started to get suspicious, but I doubted it. A man like him wasn't in this for the long haul. He was biding his time, waiting for the payout before moving on to his next target. While Mary and Mark reveled in their perceived victory, David, my private investigator, sent me daily updates. "Mark's getting comfortable," David told me during one of our calls. "He's been seen driving around in your car and spending time at your house. Seems like he thinks he's won the jackpot." "Let him think that," I replied. David also uncovered a string of exes Mark had conned over the years. One woman had lost her savings after Mark convinced her to invest in a fake business. Another had given him access to her credit cards, only to find herself drowning in debt when he disappeared. "He's good at what he does," David said. "So am I," I responded. While Mary played her games, I continued mine. I sent her a casual text. "Hope everything's going well at home. I'm wrapping up here and we'll be back soon." It was deliberately vague, designed to keep her guessing. She didn't reply, of course. I didn't expect her to, but I knew she'd read it and wonder what I knew, or what I was planning. A week later, David called with a significant update. "Mark's been using Mary's name to apply for loans," he said. "Small amounts, probably testing the waters to see how much he can get before she catches on." I let out a low laugh. "She won't catch on," I said. "She's too busy believing her own lies." But that wasn't all. David had uncovered another twist. Mark had been in contact with another woman, someone he'd been stringing along on the side. It was clear that Mark had no intention of sticking around once he'd milked Mary dry. "Send me everything," I told David. Meanwhile, Mary was busy throwing what she likely thought was her freedom party. I got wind of it through mutual acquaintances. She had invited friends over to celebrate her new life, parading Mark around like some kind of prize. "She's telling everyone you're the reason the marriage fell apart," one of my friends informed me. "Apparently, you were too focused on work, and she felt neglected." I wasn't surprised. Mary needed to play the victim to justify her actions. Let her. I didn't care what story she spun because I knew the truth, and so would everyone else when the time was right. As the days passed, I imagined Mary starting to feel the pressure. The house sale hadn't gone through. The bank glitch was unresolved. Mark was likely growing impatient, and her funds were dwindling. I allowed her to stew in the chaos, letting her think she was still in control. Every move I made was calculated to keep her in the dark until the moment of reckoning. Because while Mary thought she was living her best life, she was really living on borrowed time. And when that time ran out, she wouldn't know what hit her. It's ironic, really. While Mary and her lover were basking in their delusional triumph, I was halfway across the world, closing the kind of deal most people only dream about. The Berlin partnership had been months in the making, a high-stakes negotiation that required precision, patience, and no small amount of charm. In other words, exactly the kind of skills I needed to handle the situation back home. The deal wasn't just about money. It was about securing my legacy. This wasn't just a contract. It was a statement to the world and, perhaps more importantly, to myself. I wasn't a man who crumbled under pressure, and I certainly wasn't one to be outplayed. The final day of negotiations was intense. My team and I sat across from a group of stoic Germans, their expressions unreadable as we went over the finer points of the agreement. Despite the pressure, my focus didn't waver. If anything, the chaos in my personal life had sharpened my determination. I couldn't control Mary's actions, but this was mine to win. When the deal was finally signed, there was a moment of silence, followed by a handshake that seemed to last a lifetime. I smiled for the cameras, gave a brief interview, and then excused myself to return to my hotel. The moment I stepped into the elevator, I allowed myself a deep breath. The deal was done. My company was now poised for global expansion, and I had secured a future that no one, certainly not Mary, could take away from me. That evening, I treated myself to a quiet dinner. As I sipped my wine, my phone buzzed with updates from David, my private investigator. His findings were becoming more damning by the day. "Mark's up to his usual tricks," David reported. "He's been using Mary's credit to fund his lifestyle. Small purchases so far, but they're adding up." "Good," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "Let him dig his own grave." David paused before adding, "And there's more. He's still in contact with another woman. Looks like he's setting up his next con." I laughed softly. "Of course he is. He's a parasite." It's only a matter of time before he moves on. But the most satisfying update was yet to come. David had uncovered a significant detail about the supposed sale of my house. Mary had gone as far as to forge my signature on some preliminary paperwork. It wasn't enough to make the sale official, but it was a blatant act of fraud. "She's getting desperate," David said. "Desperation makes people sloppy," I replied. "Let her keep digging that hole." Later that night, I called my lawyer, Andrew, to discuss the next steps. "How airtight is our case if we take this to court?" I asked. "Very," Andrew said confidently. "Between the block transactions, the forged paperwork, and the evidence of Mark's involvement, we could easily file for damages. Not to mention the reputational blow this would deal to Mary." "I don't want to file anything yet," I said. "Not until she realizes the full extent of her mistakes." "Understood," Andrew replied. "But when you're ready, we'll be prepared." Despite everything, I couldn't stop myself from wondering what Mary was thinking. Did she truly believe she'd gotten away with it? Was she lying awake at night, waiting for the other shoe to drop? Or was she still so confident in her victory that she hadn't even considered the possibility of failure? Part of me wanted to confront her, to lay all my cards on the table and watch her squirm. But I knew better. Timing was everything. If I revealed my hand too soon, she'd have time to regroup. No, it was better to let her feel secure, to let her dig herself deeper into the mess she'd created. The next morning, as I prepared to leave Berlin, I received a final update from Lisa, my financial advisor. "We've secured all your accounts," she said. "Even if she tries to access them through a loophole, she won't get a dime." "Good," I said. "And what about the joint investments?" "Frozen," she replied. "She can't touch them without your consent." "Perfect," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "Keep everything locked down. I want her to feel the full weight of her decisions." As my plane took off, I stared out the window at the sprawling city below. Berlin had been a success, both professionally and personally. I had proven to myself, and to Mary, though she didn't know it yet, that I was a man who thrived under pressure. I wasn't just surviving this betrayal, I was thriving because of it. When I landed back home, everything would be in place. Mary thought she had won, but she was about to learn that I don't lose. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not to someone like her. By now, Mary probably thought she was living her best life. I could almost see it. Her and Mark sitting in my house, sipping expensive wine she hadn't paid for, laughing at my supposed cluelessness. She was basking in the illusion that everything had gone according to her plan. But illusions have a way of shattering, and hers was about to come crashing down. It likely started small, almost unnoticeable. Mary's first real hint that something wasn't right would have been the banking issue. She'd wake up one morning, maybe a little hungover from another night of celebrating, and decide to withdraw cash for one of Mark's endless demands. Only, instead of the transaction going through, she'd see the words "insufficient funds" flash across the ATM screen. Her first reaction would have been confusion, maybe a little annoyance. She'd call the bank, and they'd tell her there was a temporary freeze on the account due to suspicious activity. Routine protocol, nothing to worry about. At least that's what they'd say. But that tiny seed of doubt would plant itself in her mind. I can picture her pacing the living room, phone in hand, trying to sound calm as she explained the situation to Mark. He wouldn't care about the details. He'd care about the money. Men like Mark always do. The next blow would come with the house. She must have felt smug when she listed it for a quick sale, thinking she'd bypass all the red tape by pricing it low. But then, out of nowhere, the paperwork stalled. Her real estate agent would call, apologetic but firm, explaining that there was a legal issue with the deed. "What legal issue?" she'd demand, her voice rising. "Well," the agent would say hesitantly, "it seems your husband hasn't signed off on the sale." Her stomach would drop. I know Mary well enough to guess how she'd react. First, she'd blame the agent for incompetence. Then she'd blame me, ranting about how I was trying to ruin her life. Finally, she'd realize that she was running out of options. Mark, meanwhile, wouldn't have the patience for any of this. Men like him are parasites. They thrive when the host is healthy and abandon it the moment it starts to weaken. He'd start pulling away, making excuses to leave the house or handle business. Mary would notice, of course, but she'd pretend not to. Desperation does strange things to people. I imagine Mary started trying to regain control, maybe by reaching out to old friends for financial help. But that's the thing about betrayal. It isolates you. Once people see what you're capable of, they start to distance themselves, unsure of when the knife might turn on them. I didn't have to imagine much, though, because David's updates painted a clear picture of her unraveling. She's panicking, he told me during one of our calls. I caught her on camera arguing with Mark outside your house. Looks like he's on his way out. Good, I said. Let him leave. It'll make the next part easier. Do you want me to intervene? David asked. Not yet, I replied. Let her keep digging. I want her to feel it completely. As the days passed, the cracks in Mary's world widened into chasms. She tried to withdraw money again, denied. She tried to contact the real estate agent about the house, stonewalled. Even her calls to Mark started going unanswered. The best part? She tried calling me. 3 times. I let them all go to voicemail. Each time, her voice grew more frantic. Michael, please call me back. I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. Michael, I'm begging you. This is serious. I need your help. Michael, you can't just ignore me. This is your fault. Call me back. I didn't respond to any of them. Let her stew in the mess she created. The final straw came when David uncovered the truth about Mark's escape plan. He's been withdrawing small amounts from Mary's personal account, David told me. Looks like he's been funneling it to a separate account under a fake name. I laughed. Classic Mark. Any idea where he's headed? South America. If the passport records are legit, David said. I nodded. Let him go. He'll get what's coming to him eventually. When Mark finally disappeared, Mary was left alone in the ruins of her own making. She was broke, pregnant, and trapped in a house she couldn't sell. Her world, which had seemed so perfect just weeks ago, was now nothing more than a crumbling facade. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the truth is, Mary's downfall wasn't an accident. It was the result of her own choices, her own greed, and her own betrayal. All I did was step aside and let her destroy herself. The flight back home felt surreal. As the plane descended, I wasn't just returning to the same city I'd left weeks earlier. I was stepping into a battleground. But the fight was over before it had even begun. I had won, and Mary didn't even know it yet. I kept my emotions in check as the flight attendants made their final announcements, though a faint smirk tugged at the corners of my lips. The stage was set, the players in place. All that remained was the final act. The moment I stepped into the terminal, I saw her. Mary. She was standing near the baggage claim, looking as though she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and her expression, well, it was the kind of look that only comes from realizing your world is falling apart. I stopped in my tracks for a moment, letting the scene sink in. I didn't need to ask why she was there. She wasn't waiting to greet me out of love or regret. She was desperate. Michael, she called, rushing toward me. Her voice was loud enough to turn a few heads, but I kept my pace steady. She reached me just as I set my carry-on down. Her eyes were wild, her hands trembling as she grabbed my arm. What happened? She demanded, her voice a mix of anger and panic. Why is everything gone? The accounts, the house, the car. What did you do? I tilted my head slightly, studying her as if she were a stranger. What did I do? I repeated, my tone cold. Everything went just as I planned. Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, she was speechless. That didn't happen often with Mary. She tried to recover, stammering something about the house sale and the bank. You sabotaged everything. You froze the accounts, blocked the sale. Why would you do this to me? Why? I asked, my voice steady. Because you tried to destroy me, Mary. You lied, you schemed, and you thought I'd just roll over and let you take everything. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You thought I was a fool, that I wouldn't see through you. But here's the thing, Mary. I've been playing this game longer than you have, and I don't lose. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. But it wasn't enough to sway me. Michael, please, she said, her voice cracking. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. Mark, he manipulated me. I raised an eyebrow. Mark manipulated you? Is that what you're telling yourself now? She nodded desperately, as if clinging to the idea that I might still believe her. He lied to me, Michael. He promised me things, but he's gone now. I realize how wrong I was. Please, just give me another chance. I let out a bitter laugh. Another chance? Mary, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to betray me. You sold the house, you drained the accounts, and you flaunted your affair in my face. Now, you want me to forget all of that because Mark left you high and dry? She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. I warned you once, Mary. I told you not to underestimate me, but you didn't listen. And now, you're reaping what you sowed. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the terminal. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I have nothing left. I need you. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe, but it was fleeting. You need me? I said, crouching down to meet her gaze. Where was that sentiment when you called me and told me you were leaving? When you sold our house out from under me? When you lied about being pregnant with another man's child? Her sobs grew louder, drawing more attention from passers-by. I stood up, unwilling to let her drag me into her performance. You made your choices, Mary, I said, my voice firm. Now, you have to live with them. I grabbed my carry-on and started to walk away. She called after me, her voice hoarse and pleading. Michael, please, don't leave me like this. I paused for a moment, glancing over my shoulder. You left me first, Mary. Remember that. And with that, I walked out of the terminal, leaving her behind in the chaos she had created. The ride home was quiet, my thoughts a mix of satisfaction and resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. Mary had tried to break me, but she'd only made me stronger. As I pulled into the driveway of my new apartment, a sleek, modern space I'd secured while still abroad, I felt a sense of peace. Mary's chapter in my life was over, and the next one was just beginning. 2 days after the airport scene, Mary called me again. Not that I had expected her to stop. Her messages had gone from frantic, pleading to indignant rage, all sprinkled with a dose of self-pity. I ignored every single one. Then, she sent a text. We need to talk. Please. Just one meeting. I thought about ignoring her again, but something in me wanted closure. Maybe it was curiosity. What excuse would she conjure up now? Or maybe, I just wanted to see how far she'd fallen. Whatever the reason, I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. I chose the location deliberately, neutral ground where she couldn't cause a scene. I arrived first, ordered a black coffee, and waited. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The confident, poised Mary the first once knew was gone. She looked disheveled, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed, likely from sleepless nights and endless crying. Michael, she said, her voice trembling as she sat down. I nodded curtly, leaning back in my chair. Mary. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding my gaze. I let the silence stretch, watching her squirm. Finally, she blurted out, I'm sorry. I raised an eyebrow. For what, exactly? For everything, she said quickly. For lying to you, for hurting you, she choked on her words, tears welling in her eyes. For betraying you. I sipped my coffee, letting her words hang in the air. Go on, I said. She took a shaky breath. I don't know what I was thinking. Mark, he seemed so different at first. He promised me things, adventure, freedom, a life I thought I wanted. But it was all lies. He used me, Michael. He took everything and left me with nothing. I let out a low laugh, shaking my head. You expect me to believe that Mark manipulated you? That you had no part in this? Her face crumpled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You just what? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. You just decided to sell our house without my knowledge? To drain our accounts? To flaunt your affair while I was halfway across the world, working to build a future for us? Tell me, Mary, which part of that wasn't your choice? She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. I was selfish, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I wanted something different, but I didn't realize what I was throwing away. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. And now you realize? She nodded, looking at me with those same pleading eyes she used when she wanted to get her way. Please, Michael. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll make it up to you, I swear. I stared at her for a long moment, weighing my next words. Then, I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. What's this? She asked, hesitating. Proof, I said simply. Proof that you didn't just betray me. You destroyed yourself in the process. She opened the folder, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents. Bank statements showing her unauthorized withdrawals. The fake signatures she used to try to sell the house. Photos of Mark with another woman, his next target. Her face went pale as she read the final document. A court motion prepared by my lawyer, Andrew. This is... She looked up at me, her voice cracking. You're filing charges? I shrugged. Not yet. That depends on you. Her tears started again, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Michael, please don't do this. I've already lost everything. I can't lose more. You lost everything the moment you betrayed me, I said coldly. I'm giving you a chance to walk away without legal consequences. But make no mistake, Mary, this is the last chance you'll ever get from me. She nodded quickly, clutching the folder like it was a lifeline. I'll do whatever you want. I'll leave. I'll stay out of your life. Just don't take this to court. I stood, grabbing my coffee. You'll leave the house immediately, I said. Andrew will be in touch to ensure a clean separation. If you so much as try to contact me again, the motion gets filed. She opened her mouth to argue, but thought better of it, nodding instead. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The confrontation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Mary's tears, her apologies, they didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally free of her. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. And as I stepped into the bright sunlight, I realized I didn't need her, or anyone else, to define my happiness. Walking out of that cafe marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. For weeks, I had lived under the shadow of betrayal, anger, and resentment. But as the doors swung shut behind me, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't just walking away from Mary. I was walking toward the life I deserved. The first step was reclaiming my space. I had no desire to return to the house we once shared. That place was tainted by her lies, her schemes, and the memories of a love that had been nothing more than an illusion. Instead, I moved into a sleek, modern penthouse downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a constant reminder of the heights I had climbed despite everything. Those first few weeks alone were a mix of reflection and rebuilding. I filled my new home with things that brought me peace, a wall of books, abstract art, and a minimalist design that mirrored the clarity I was finally beginning to feel. It wasn't about material possessions. It was about creating a space that felt like mine, free from the shadows of the past. My work became my sanctuary. The Berlin deal had catapulted my company into the international market, and I threw myself into expanding the business. Long hours at the office were no longer a burden. They were a blessing. Every contract I signed, every successful project I launched, felt like another brick in the fortress I was building around my life. But it wasn't just about work. For the first time in years, I made time for myself. I started running in the mornings, letting the rhythm of my footsteps clear my mind. I picked up hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage, playing the piano, learning to cook, even taking up photography. Each new skill, each moment of quiet accomplishment, was a reminder that I was more than the man Mary had tried to destroy. Of course, there were moments when the past tried to creep back in. Mutual friends would call, hesitating before asking, "Have you heard from Mary?" I always gave the same answer, "No, and I don't plan to." Her name no longer triggered anger or sadness. It was just a name now, tied to a chapter of my life that had ended. The real turning point came at a company gala. It was a black tie event, the kind of evening where everyone sipped champagne and exchanged polite conversations. Normally, I would have kept my distance, preferring to stay on the sidelines. But this time, I felt different, lighter, freer. That's where I met Claire. She wasn't like Mary. Where Mary had been all about appearances, Claire was genuine, grounded. We started talking by chance, bonding over a shared love of literature. She was a writer, passionate about storytelling, and as the night went on, I found myself captivated by her authenticity. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd lost. Over the next few months, Claire and I grew closer. We took things slow, both of us wary of rushing into anything. She knew about my past. Well, the parts one was willing to share, and she never judged or pried. Instead, she encouraged me to focus on the future, reminding me that life was too short to dwell on what couldn't be changed. With her, I discovered a different kind of happiness. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and real. Meanwhile, Mary's absence was barely noticeable. The separation agreement was finalized without incident, and Andrew informed me that she had moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town. According to David, Mark had never returned, and Mary was now struggling to make ends meet. I could have felt vindicated, maybe even smug, but honestly, I didn't feel much of anything. Her downfall wasn't my concern anymore. My focus was on building a life that didn't include her, or the chaos she brought with her. Looking back, I realized that Mary's betrayal, as painful as it had been, was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to confront the cracks in our marriage, to reevaluate what I wanted out of life, and to rediscover the strength I had forgotten I possessed. Now, standing on the balcony of my penthouse, a glass of whiskey in hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The city lights stretched out before me, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. This was my new beginning, and for the first time, I was ready to embrace it. Mary's life unraveled like a thread caught in a storm. After our final meeting at the cafe, she disappeared from my radar. I didn't seek out updates, but they found me anyway. Whispers through mutual friends, occasional reports from David, and the stray rumors that always circulate in social circles. The picture they painted was grim, but not unexpected. Mary moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the life of luxury she had once enjoyed. With no Mark, no house, and no access to the accounts she tried to drain, she was left scraping by on odd jobs. The glow of her socialite life had dimmed, replaced by the harsh realities of her new circumstances. But her troubles didn't end there. One day, David called me with an update that caught even me off guard. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Mary's being sued by one of Mark's other victims. Turns out he used her name to secure a loan, and now the creditors are coming after her." I chuckled, shaking my head. I guess karma works faster than I thought. David hesitated. "Do you want me to intervene?" "No," I said firmly. "She made her bed. Let her lie in it." As much as I wanted to let go, a small part of me wondered if Mary truly understood the depth of her betrayal, not just to me, but to herself. She had destroyed her own life in pursuit of something that never existed, and now she was paying the price. Months passed, and I began to notice a shift in how people spoke about me. At first, there had been pity, sympathy for the man whose wife had betrayed him, but now there was respect. My name carried weight, not just because of my professional success, but because of how I had handled everything. I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't lashed out. I had simply moved forward, leaving the wreckage behind me. That respect came to a head at a company gala. It was one of those glittering events where everyone wanted to be seen, and I was no exception. But this time, I wasn't alone. Claire was by my side, her presence a quiet testament to the new chapter one was building. As we mingled with guests, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. A year ago, I had been a man blindsided by betrayal, scrambling to protect what I had built. Now, I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Mary, meanwhile, had faded into the background. The last I heard, she was working at a small boutique, trying to stay afloat. She had written me a letter, a long, rambling apology that alternated between regret and justification. "I made mistakes," she wrote. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for what I did. But I was lost, Michael. I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." I read the letter once, then tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The night of the gala ended with Claire and me standing on my penthouse balcony, the city lights stretching out before us. She leaned against the railing, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the skyline. "You've been quiet," she said, turning to look at me. "Just thinking," I replied. "About her?" I shook my head. "No, about everything. About how much can change in a year." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "Well, here's to change." I raised my glass, clinking it against hers. "To change," I said. As I stood there, I realized something important. Mary's betrayal hadn't broken me. It had freed me. It had forced me to confront the cracks in my life and rebuild something stronger. It had taught me the value of loyalty, the importance of resilience, and the power of letting go. I didn't need revenge or validation. I didn't need her regret or her apologies. All I needed was the future I was creating for myself. A future filled with possibilities, untainted by the mistakes of the past. This was my triumphant end. Not because I had one, but because I had moved on. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy.